Night draped itself over the Thai countryside, quiet, humid, and still. Above the darkness, Lauda Air Flight 04, a Boeing 767 bound for Vienna, sliced through the clouds at 17,000 feet. Inside, passengers dozed under dim cabin lights, engines humming in steady rhythm. Then, something changed. In the cockpit, a small amber light blinked on the panel. Thrust reverser unlocked. It shouldn't have been possible. The reversers were designed to stay sealed tight until the plane was safely on the ground. Captain Thomas Jureka frowned, tapping the gauge as if it might be lying. Beside him, First Officer Joseph Thurner scanned his instruments. No other warnings. No pressure drop. No vibration. Just that one word glowing like a bad omen. "It's probably a sensor fault," Jureka muttered. "Copy that," Thurner replied, resetting the alert. For a moment, the cockpit fell silent again. Then, without warning, the left engine roared to full reverse thrust. The aircraft jerked violently, pitching nose up, then rolling hard left. Every loose object in the cockpit lifted into the air. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered red. What the hell? Jureka grabbed the control column, fighting against forces no pilot could overcome. The 767 twisted as if caught in a storm. But the sky outside was calm. A brutal snap echoed through the fuselage. The wings began to fail. Down below, villagers looked up from their fields and saw it. 2 streaks of burning metal cutting through the night sky. A moment later, the jungle shook with the sound of impact. Silence returned, but the stars above were still burning. Narrator, calm grave. This is the story of Lauda Air Flight 04, and how a single mechanical flaw turned one of aviation's safest jets into a nightmare. Lauda Air wasn't just another airline. It was the dream of a man who knew danger better than most. Niki Lauda, the Formula One world champion, who had already survived one fiery crash in his lifetime. He built his airline with the same precision he demanded from his race cars. Safe, efficient, and proudly Austrian. On the evening of May 26, 1991, one of his Boeing 767s waited on the tarmac at Bangkok's Don Mueang Airport, preparing for the long flight to Vienna. Lauda Air Flight 04, 223 people on board. The night was warm, the runway lights shimmering in the tropical haze. At the controls sat Captain Thomas Jureka, 48 years old, calm and respected. Beside him, First Officer Joseph Thurner, 41, precise and methodical. The kind of man who triple-checked every number before takeoff. Both were seasoned professionals. The 767 was their trusted machine. Inside the cabin, the mood was quiet and routine. Families returning home, tourists heading to Europe, couples sleeping beneath folded blankets. Flight attendants moved softly down the aisles, smiles rehearsed, safety cards tucked neatly into seatbacks. At 11:02 p.m., the engines roared to life. Twin Pratt & Whitney JT9D turbines that had never failed in their history. The captain's voice came over the intercom, polite and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Lauda Air Flight 04. We're expecting a smooth ride tonight." Moments later, the 767 thundered down the runway and lifted gracefully into the black sky. Bangkok's lights fell away behind them like embers fading in the dark. As the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude, the cockpit was calm, autopilot engaged, coffee cups balanced on the console. They chatted casually about Vienna's weather, the quiet roads this late at night, and how still the air felt above Thailand. Then, a soft chime. A single message illuminated on the engine panel. Thrust reverser unlocked. Jureka frowned. It had appeared briefly during a previous flight weeks ago, then vanished. Maintenance had checked it, found nothing. Now, here it was again. He scanned the readings, Engine pressure normal, temperature steady, no vibration. He radioed maintenance control in Bangkok. They replied almost instantly. Probably a false signal, Captain. Continue climb. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on that small amber light. It wasn't the kind of thing you ever wanted to see mid-air, especially not at 20,000 feet over a sleeping jungle in the dead of night. Outside the cockpit, the moonlight washed over silver wings and smooth clouds. Nothing seemed wrong. But inside the left engine, nacelle, a hydraulic valve had already begun to fail. A silent malfunction waiting for the right vibration to trigger the unthinkable. The night was calm. The passengers were sleeping, and Flight 04 was climbing into history. At 23,000 feet, the Boeing 767 cut smoothly through a moonlit sky. The air was calm, no turbulence, no traffic, just the deep hum of engines carrying 200 Narundai lives westward toward Vienna. In the cockpit, Captain Thomas Jureka leaned back slightly, glancing at the glowing instruments. Everything looked perfect. Fuel balance steady, pressure in the green, altitude rising on schedule. And yet, that one amber light hadn't gone away. Thrust reverser unlocked. It pulsed quietly on the engine display, an almost insignificant flicker in a sea of data. It's probably just a faulty micro switch, Thurner said, sipping coffee. I know, Jureka replied, but it shouldn't even think about unlocking up here. They checked the manual again, in page after page of technical jargon. The entry for that alert was short and vague. Possible indication error. If no abnormal engine behavior, continue flight. In other words, ignore it. Jureka followed the checklist anyway. Hydraulics, normal. Thrust symmetry, normal. Vibration, 0. Everything looked fine. But the captain's instincts wouldn't let it go. He'd been flying for 25 years. He knew the difference between a nuisance light and a warning that meant something deeper. Let's log. It, he muttered. Maintenance can deal with it when we land. Copy that, Thurner said, jotting down the time, 23:14 local. They settled back into the rhythm of cruise. The moon hung low, glinting off the metal of the wing. Below, faint lights marked small villages scattered across northern Thailand. In the cabin, the passengers were quiet. Cabin lights dimmed, engines humming like white noise. A flight attendant walked down the aisle, checking seatbelts and blankets. Somewhere near the back, a baby stirred, then fell quiet again. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. Then, 30 minutes later, the warning blinked again. Thrust reverser unlocked. Then it disappeared. Then back again, Jureka's brow furrowed. That's new, he said. Could it be electrical? Thurner suggested. But before they could test it, another indicator chimed. A faint beep, followed by an engine vibration needle trembling upward for a split second before stabilizing. It was gone as fast as it came. They looked at each other. We'll monitor it closely, Jureka said, tightening his harness slightly. He radioed Bangkok control. Bangkok, Lauda 004. We're experiencing intermittent reverser warning on the left engine. All parameters normal, continuing climb. Lauda 004, Roger. Report any further anomalies. The radio crackled into silence again. The two men sat in a cocoon of dim red light, the hum of the engine steady, the world outside ink black and endless. They couldn't see the flaw. Deep inside the left engine's hydraulic system, a tiny servo valve had jammed in just the wrong position. It wouldn't show up on instruments. It wouldn't trigger a failure warning. But it was waiting. One random vibration away from releasing 30,000 pounds of reverse thrust into the airflow. And when it did, nothing on Earth could stop what came next. The Boeing 767 drifted into the quietest stretch of sky over northern Thailand. No nearby traffic, no storms, no warnings from air traffic control. Just darkness, a calm sea of air stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Captain Thomas Eureka and First Officer Joseph Thurner were preparing to level off at 24,000 feet when it happened. A faint click, then a jolt, small at first, like hitting a pocket of turbulence. But this wasn't turbulence. The left engine's thrust reverser, the same mechanism designed to slow the aircraft after landing, had just deployed mid-flight. Inside the cockpit, the flight data recorder captured it. Thrust reverser deployed, left engine. A roar exploded through the cabin. The entire airframe shuddered as if struck by an invisible hand. The jet pitched up sharply, then twisted into a violent left roll. "What the hell?" Eureka shouted, slamming the yoke forward. "Left engine reverse," Thurner yelled back. Alarms screamed. Red lights strobed across the instrument panel. A split second later, the aircraft rolled, past 90 degrees. The left wing pointing straight toward the jungle below. Passengers woke to chaos. Overhead bins burst open, trays and luggage launched across the cabin. A woman screamed as oxygen masks snapped from the ceiling. The entire aircraft began to plunge nose down, caught in a deadly aerodynamic spin. In the cockpit, the two men fought to save it. Eureka hauled the yoke, trying to level the wings. The G-forces pinned them to their seats. The altimeter spun downward like a clock gone mad. "Full power, full power." "We've got no control." The sound of rushing air was deafening. A deep, resonant howl as the jet tore through its own slipstream. At 17,000 feet, the airframe reached critical stress limits. Metal groaned, then snapped. The left wing sheared off completely. Milliseconds later, the right followed, torn away by aerodynamic overload. The cockpit went dark. The power readings vanished. The black boxes recorded their final seconds, pitch, roll, and vertical speed climbing beyond any recoverable threshold. Down below, Thai villagers heard what they thought was thunder. But the night sky lit up with two streaks of orange fire, trailing sparks and fragments. One witness would later recall, it was like the sky itself ripped open. The main fuselage broke apart midair. Sections of wing, tail, and cabin rained down over the thick jungle near Suphanburi province. There was no mayday call, no time. The jet had gone from stable cruise to total destruction in less than 20 seconds. In the silence that followed, debris burned faintly across the forest floor. Fuselage panels smoldered under the humid night air. A single red navigation light blinked weakly amid the wreckage, then died. The radar screen at Bangkok Control showed the blip vanish. One moment there, the next gone. Controllers tried hailing them. "Lauda 004, Bangkok Control, do you copy?" No response. Then again, "Lauda 004, confirm altitude?" Only static. They marked the time, 23:17. Somewhere below, 223 lives had already been lost. The investigators would later discover that a single hydraulic valve, no bigger than a matchbox, had failed inside the left engine's reverser system. When it unlocked, 30,000 pounds of reverse thrust pushed forward on one wing while the other kept driving back. The forces ripped the airplane apart mid-flight, something Boeing engineers had long insisted was impossible. But that night, over Thailand, the impossible happened. Morning came slowly over the Thai countryside, golden light cutting through mist that hung above the trees. What had been a quiet night was now a scene of devastation stretching for miles. Locals from nearby villages were the first to find it. They followed the smell of jet fuel and the faint hiss of smoldering metal deep into the jungle. Twisted aluminum panels seats torn from the cabin, and fragments of luggage were scattered across the hillsides. One man later recalled, "We thought it was thunder, but then the ground shook." When rescuers arrived hours later, it was clear there would be no survivors. Lauda Air Flight 4 had disintegrated mid-air, spreading wreckage across more than 3 square kilometers of dense terrain. Thai emergency teams struggled to reach the site. The jungle was thick, roads almost non-existent. Helicopters hovered overhead, lowering rescue workers into the trees. The heat, the humidity, and the silence gave the scene an eerie stillness. Among the first to arrive was an Austrian embassy representative, sent to identify the aircraft. He stood in silence, looking at the Lauda Air logo scorched across a piece of the fuselage. Word reached Vienna within hours. When Niki Lauda heard the news, he refused to believe it at first. Then, when confirmation came, he made a decision that shocked his staff. "I'm flying there myself." Within 48 hours, Niki Lauda was in Thailand, walking through the wreckage of his own airline. Witnesses remembered him picking up pieces of twisted metal with his bare hands, his face expressionless, but his voice calm. He asked the investigators one thing: where are the engines? They hadn't been found yet. But Lauda knew if the engines could be recovered, they would tell the truth. Days later, deep in the forest, recovery teams found them, buried nose first in the soil, still partly intact. The left engine's reverser system was badly damaged, but its components were unmistakable. Lauda crouched beside the wreckage, mud on his shoes, and whispered to no one in particular, "Something mechanical failed. I want proof." For him, it wasn't about blame, it was about truth. Because if a single mechanical flaw could destroy a jet mid-air, he wanted the entire world, and Boeing, to face it. When Niki Lauda returned from Thailand, he wasn't just mourning a tragedy. He was preparing for war. The official investigation had barely begun, but early whispers suggested that Boeing engineers were reluctant to admit any design flaw. Their claim was simple: a thrust reverser cannot deploy in flight. It's mechanically impossible. Lauda had seen the wreckage. He had seen what impossible looked like: twisted wings, metal torn like paper, and the reverser cowl blown wide open. He wasn't a pilot that day. He was an engineer, a racer, a man who had once escaped death and refused to accept coincidence. In Vienna, he gathered his technical team, laid out photos of the wreckage, and said, "If they won't test it, we will." He personally flew to Seattle to meet with Boeing executives. Inside a polished conference room, surrounded by engineers and lawyers, Lauda placed a photo of the burned reverser on the table. "Your system failed," he said quietly. "My people are dead." The engineers pushed back. The hydraulic design had redundancy, safety locks, and fail-safes. One of them even said, "Captain Lauda, it's simply not possible in flight conditions." Lauda didn't argue. He just nodded. Then he rented a flight simulator, hired test pilots, and recreated the exact scenario. What they discovered was terrifying. When the reverser deployed at cruise power, even for a fraction of a second, the aircraft became unrecoverable. The nose pitched violently, roll control vanished, and within seconds, the simulated jet broke apart. He filmed everything and brought the footage back to Boeing. When they watched the playback, the cockpit alarms screaming, the simulated jet spiraling down, the room went silent. One engineer muttered, almost under his breath, "So it can happen." That footage became evidence for investigators and regulators around the world. The NTSB and Austrian Accident Board both confirmed. The left engine's hydraulic control valve had failed, allowing the reverser sleeve to deploy in flight, a chain reaction that instantly destroyed the aircraft. The implications were enormous. Boeing was forced to redesign the thrust reverser system on every 767 in service. Software updates, additional locking mechanisms, and new in-flight safety interlocks were added across the fleet. But for Lauda, it wasn't about policy. It was about accountability. He appeared before the press, calm but firm. Technology failed, procedures failed, and trust was lost. But we'll make sure this never happens again. Not on my airline, not on anyone's. In the years that followed, that promise reshaped flight safety worldwide. Lauda Air's tragedy became a case study in every major aviation training program. Because Niki Lauda, a man who had survived fire once before, refused to let another flame go unanswered. The wreckage of Lauda Air Flight 04 was eventually cleared from the jungles of Thailand, but its lessons would echo for decades. What investigators pieced together became one of the most critical warnings in modern aviation. Sometimes, the smallest failure hides inside the most trusted technology. The final report was blunt. The left engine's thrust reverser isolation valve had malfunctioned, a defect so rare that Boeing never thought it could cause a real-world accident. When the valve allowed pressure to leak, the reverser sleeve unlocked and deployed midair. Once that happened, no amount of pilot skill or strength could have saved the aircraft. The system that was meant to slow a jet on landing had, instead, ripped it apart in flight. In response, Boeing issued worldwide directives. Every 767, and later, every aircraft using similar reverser designs, had to be fitted with new electronic interlocks, preventing deployment in the air. The company also rewrote the aircraft's warning logic so that any hint of reverser malfunction would trigger an immediate shutdown sequence, long before danger could escalate. The changes worked. Since that day, not a single Boeing 767 has suffered a similar failure. But for Niki Lauda, the technical answers were only half the story. In interviews, he spoke softly about the victims, 223 people from over a dozen nations, and the crew who never had a chance. They didn't die because of fate, he said. They died because something we trusted broke, and that means we have to build it better. He made good on that belief. Lauda Air became known for some of the strictest maintenance and training standards in Europe. And every new pilot at the airline was told the same thing during induction. If something doesn't feel right, stop. Question it. No flight is worth ignoring a doubt. More than 3 decades later, aviation experts still reference Flight 004 as a turning point. The disaster that redefined what impossible means in engineering. The sky over Thailand is quiet again now. But somewhere in that silence, there's a legacy, written not in metal or manuals, but in determination. The legacy of a man who refused to let anyone die for nothing. Lauda Air Flight 04, the night the sky tore apart.